Every time you walk into a store, grab a basket, and pick items off a shelf yourself, you are following a behavioral script written by one man. Today, selecting your own apples and comparing cereal boxes feels like a fundamental human right. But this system of self-service is a completely artificial invention. Before the 20th century, no customer was allowed to simply walk up to a shelf and touch the merchandise. The man who changed this was Clarence Saunders, a high school dropout who quietly engineered the psychological and physical architecture of modern retail. How did a small-town grocery clerk completely rewrite the global relationship between consumers and the goods they buy? The story of modern shopping begins in Virginia in the year 1881, when Clarence Saunders was born into a remarkably poor family. His formal education ended by age 14, forcing him to take a job as a clerk in a local general store. This was an era when retail was a heavily guarded, labor-intensive process. A shopper would approach a wooden counter and hand a written list to a clerk wearing a white apron. The clerk would then walk back and forth across the store, fetching flour, sugar, and canned goods one by one. The customer never interacted directly with the products, meaning they could not easily compare brands or discover new items by chance. The store owner dictated the flow of information, the pace of the transaction, and often the price, which was rarely marked on the item itself. Prices could fluctuate based on who was asking, and the entire system relied heavily on personal credit rather than cash. Saunders spent his teenage years running back and forth behind these counters, absorbing the crushing inefficiency of the traditional grocery model. He noticed that during peak hours, customers grew angry as they waited in long lines for a single clerk to become available. Store owners were bleeding money by paying massive labor costs just to have employees fetch items that customers could easily pick up themselves. The physical layout of the traditional store was a chaotic jumble, with barrels of molasses and sacks of flour piled wherever they fit. Because only the clerks needed to know where things were, there was no logical organization or standardized display. Inventory rotted in dark corners, and store owners had no reliable way to track what was actually selling. When Saunders moved to Memphis, Tennessee, in the year 1902, he transitioned into the wholesale grocery business. His job was to sell bulk goods to dozens of small, independent grocery stores across the region. Working as a wholesaler gave him a godlike view of the retail landscape, exposing a glaring industry-wide crisis. He realized that nearly every independent grocer was operating on dangerously thin margins, crushed by the overhead cost of maintaining a large staff. Furthermore, the credit system meant that grocers often waited months to get paid by their customers, leading to frequent bankruptcies. Saunders saw that the physical layout of the store itself was the root cause of this financial instability. When Saunders joined a major wholesale firm, he began organizing cooperative groups of independent grocers to pool their purchasing power. He attempted to teach them how to buy goods in larger, cheaper quantities to compete with early chain stores. He even published a trade newsletter, using it to aggressively lecture store owners on their inefficient business practices. Despite his efforts, the independent grocers continued to fail at an alarming rate. Saunders realized that giving them cheaper wholesale goods was useless if their retail operations were fundamentally broken by labor bottlenecks at the wooden counter. The traditional architecture of the grocery store was designed to prevent theft and control inventory, but it effectively strangled sales volume. If a store wanted to sell more goods, it had to hire more clerks, which immediately wiped out any additional profit. Saunders became obsessed with the idea of severing the link between labor costs and sales volume. He began experimenting with a radical concept that would eliminate the clerk entirely and force the customer to do the physical labor of shopping. His vision required a complete spatial reorganization of the retail environment, turning the store into a machine designed to process human beings efficiently. However, allowing the public to roam freely among the merchandise posed a massive security risk. Store owners believed that if customers were allowed to touch the goods, they would simply steal them or cause chaos in the aisles. To solve this, Saunders needed to design a physical environment that guided customer behavior without requiring human supervision. He started drafting blueprints for a completely new type of building, one that would dictate exactly how a shopper moved from the moment they walked through the door. This architectural blueprint would eventually become the foundational document of the modern consumer economy. In September of the year 1916, Clarence Saunders opened the doors to a radically new retail experiment in Memphis. He named his strange new store Piggly Wiggly, a deliberately absurd name designed to force people to talk about it. When the first customers arrived, they were greeted not by a helpful clerk, but by a wooden turnstile. The United States Patent Office granted Saunders a sweeping patent in the year 1917 for his self-serving store architecture. The patent document detailed a specific entrance mechanism featuring a locked turnstile that only rotated inward. This physical barrier forced the shopper into a one-way path, stripping away their freedom to wander randomly. Once past the turnstile, the customer was trapped in a continuous, serpentine aisle system mapped out precisely on Saunders' architectural blueprints. The wooden shelving units were built to a specific height, forcing the shopper to walk past every single item in the store before reaching the exit. This spatial manipulation engineered a completely new psychological phenomenon known today as impulse buying. Because there were no clerks to ask for prices, Saunders had to invent a new system of visual communication. The store's inventory ledgers were translated into thousands of tiny, individual paper price tags attached to every single can and box. This simple piece of paper permanently destroyed the ancient practice of haggling, standardizing the cost of living for everyone. To replace the clerk's carrying labor, Saunders provided customers with a small wooden basket to carry their own goods. The physical basket acted as a psychological limit, ensuring shoppers bought exactly as much as their arms could carry. This shifted the physical burden of transport entirely onto the consumer, a massive transfer of unpaid labor that we still accept today. At the end of the maze, the architectural blueprint funneled the shopper into a narrow chute leading to a cashier. The daily settlement ledger recorded every transaction in pure cash, completely eliminating the risky credit accounts that bankrupted traditional grocers. This cash-only checkout lane guaranteed immediate liquidity, allowing the store to restock inventory faster than ever before. The Memphis store was an instant, explosive financial success. By slashing his labor costs, Saunders could sell goods cheaper than any competitor in the city while still making a higher profit margin. The public, initially confused by the system, quickly grew to love the autonomy of inspecting and choosing their own food. Realizing he had invented a highly scalable machine, Saunders began franchising the Piggly Wiggly concept across the United States. He sold the rights to use his patented floor plan, his standardized fixtures, and his bizarre brand name. Independent grocers who had previously struggled suddenly clamored to adopt his automated retail architecture. By the early 1920s, there were over 1,200 Piggly Wiggly stores operating nationwide. Saunders had transformed from a rural grocery clerk into a formidable corporate titan, controlling a retail empire worth tens of millions of dollars. He funneled this immense wealth into the construction of a massive, pink marble mansion in Memphis, a physical monument to his success. But this sudden, aggressive expansion attracted the attention of powerful financial syndicates in New York. Wall Street speculators recognized the immense cash flow generated by the Piggly Wiggly franchise network. They began aggressively shorting the company's stock, attempting to artificially drive down the price and force Saunders out of his own creation. Saunders viewed this financial attack as a personal insult from a corrupt Eastern establishment. Rather than quietly accepting the market manipulation, he decided to fight the most powerful bankers in the country using his own money. In the year 1923, he initiated a massive financial counterattack, attempting to corner the market on his own company's stock. To execute his unprecedented financial squeeze, Saunders secured a loan of $10 million from bankers across the southern states. He used these funds to quietly purchase nearly every available share of Piggly Wiggly stock on the open market. His strategy was to corner the market, a ruthless tactic designed to force Wall Street short sellers to buy the stock back from him at extortionate prices. The mechanics of his trap relied entirely on the strict legal obligations of short selling. The standard broker loan agreements required the speculators to eventually return borrowed shares, no matter the current market price. Because Saunders now secretly owned almost all the circulating shares, he alone could dictate the ransom price to the panicked syndicates. By March of the year 1923, his financial trap snapped shut on the Eastern establishment. The stock exchange ticker tape showed Piggly Wiggly shares skyrocketing from $39 to $124 in a single morning. The short sellers were cornered, facing absolute institutional ruin if they could not locate shares to cover their desperate bets. But the rural grocer underestimated the raw, self-protecting power of the New York financial elite. The governing board of the New York Stock Exchange convened an emergency, closed-door meeting to save their own members from bankruptcy. The exchange issued a formal suspension order, permanently halting all trading of Piggly Wiggly stock and freezing Saunders out of his victory. This unprecedented regulatory intervention changed the rules of settlement retroactively to protect the entrenched brokers. The exchange board granted the short sellers an extended deadline to find private shares off the open market, bypassing Saunders completely. Left holding massive loan debts in an artificially frozen asset, Saunders was financially paralyzed. Within months, the grocery pioneer was forced to declare personal bankruptcy to satisfy his furious Southern creditors. The official bankruptcy settlement ledger stripped him of his entire corporate empire, his retail patents, and his wealth. He even lost the deed to his unfinished pink marble mansion in Memphis, which was eventually sold off to the city. Despite losing control of his empire, Saunders refused to stop trying to engineer human shopping behavior. In the year 1937, he introduced an even more radical, fully automated grocery concept called the keydoozle. The store's mechanical schematic required shoppers to insert a special physical key into specific slots, triggering electrical relays to drop goods onto hidden conveyor belts. This automated system attempted to completely mechanize the checkout process, delivering bagged groceries directly to the exit. However, the electrical wiring diagrams simply could not handle the rapid, unpredictable sequence of human choices during peak hours. The machinery frequently broke down, mixing up orders and proving that his original reliance on unpaid human labor was far more reliable than complex robotics. Saunders died in relative obscurity in the year 1953, but his initial architectural revolution permanently conquered the globe. The corporate successors to Piggly Wiggly took his patented self-service floor plan and scaled it into the massive, sprawling, modern supermarket. Every big-box retailer today still relies on his foundational concept of eliminating the clerk to continuously expand sales volume. To further exploit the psychology of self-service, his corporate successors later expanded his small wooden basket into the rolling metal shopping cart. The larger volumetric capacity of the metal cart physically encouraged shoppers to accumulate even more items before reaching the checkout. This simple physical tool magnified the impulse buying phenomenon that Saunders had originally engineered in Memphis. The physical burden of navigating massive warehouses and carrying our own goods is now universally accepted as entirely normal. The standardized paper price tag he championed remains the absolute authority, completely erasing the consumer's ability to negotiate the cost of daily survival. Saunders successfully transferred the heaviest labor costs of retail directly onto the shoulders of the public, disguising it as personal freedom. The architecture of self-service completely transformed our physical relationship with the economy. Looking at his immense legacy, do you believe Saunders liberated the modern consumer by giving us autonomy and lower prices? Or did he simply design an inescapable psychological trap that forces us to perform unpaid labor for corporate profit? Subscribe to our channel to uncover the hidden historical blueprints and secret power structures that quietly govern your everyday life.